Well, the way I ended up in San Diego was merely because I wanted to visit my mother. I'm an only child. She was getting on in age. I would see her whenever I lived in New York. I would get to California maybe once a year. And I started getting concerned about her living by herself. And also, I started to think that once a year might not be enough. So that's actually how I ended up in San Diego, just to visit her and see how she's doing. And I ended up living there. Um, it's interesting. The day that I left for San Diego, I did one last record date with Mingus, and it turned out to be his last record date. And it was a record date that Joni Mitchell was involved with. And literally almost every musician in New York was on this record date. It was a big band record date. So you had George Coleman, you had Michael Brecker, Randy Brecker, Larry Coryell, Lee Konitz, myself, just, a lot of wonderful musicians playing in this big band. And it was Mingus's last record date. He was ill. He had Lou Gehrig's disease. And at that particular time, he was in a wheelchair. And he was not able to move really barely at all. And that was Mingus's last record date. That was my last day in New York living there. And the very next day, I moved to San Diego. And as I said earlier, merely to maybe hang out with my mom for maybe a month or so. And then I ended up staying. So I've been there. That was in 1978. And I've been there ever since. Now, there are the advantages, if any, living away from New York possibly could be that there's less distractions, if you will, or it's just not as fast moving and as you would expect. And sometimes in that kind of environment, you can collect your thoughts better, and you can formalize. You can think about what you want to do, how you want to do it, and there you are. It's less busy, so there's a way that you can have more time to yourself and less distractions of a sort, and maybe get into writing and things like that. So it's good in that way. And it's a very pleasant city. The weather's gorgeous. It's not the biggest city in the world, of course, but it's big enough. And in these days, I'm actually able to live in San Diego and work in many other places. And I end up going to New York 3 or 4 times a year. Europe a couple times a year, maybe Japan once a year, every other year. So it's not quite like it used to be, where it was an absolute must that you be in New York. Now you can not necessarily, if you've already reached a certain status of notoriety, you don't necessarily have to be in New York. But I will say this, it's never a disadvantage if you're playing music living in New York. Yes. Well, the creative, my creative inspiration is, I can get it from just listening to the radio. I can be listening to opera and get it, or I can be listening to, hear someone sing a song. It happens that way, and sometimes it has nothing to do with anybody else. It is, let me see, I can explain it like this, at least how it might work for me. It's almost that there is a river, if I'll use an analogy of a river that's always flowing. And that is, the river for me is like all of the chords, sounds, just the river of music that's basically white noise in the mind, that's always present, that's always there. So it's almost like you're full of song, if you will. And when you get ready to write, it's almost like a person goes with a bucket and goes to the river and gets a bucket of the water, and that's the song. You know, and it becomes the bucket, as the bucket is a physical structure and its form, you know, and the water is in the bucket, and it becomes what it is. It is a set piece of physics, and that's what, when you write music, it's no longer, you know, just free-floating ideas. It becomes set and frozen. You've taken the fluidity and frozen it, and that's what a song is, because it's a certain amount of it's structured, and there's physicalities involved, even though the world of emotionality and mind is the thing that creates it. But once it's penned or written down or captured, it is what it is, just like the water in the bucket. So it works that way for me, you know. I'm always in a state of song some sort of way. Now, I'm not always inspired. Some people can write like that. I actually have to be inspired. It's hard to write meaningfully, what I would consider meaningful music. And as far as I'm concerned, to concoct a melody that's new, not pedestrian, but novel and different, but yet and still melodic, is one of the hardest things to do in music, for me at least. Well, I am involved, really, in terms of projects. Right now, I'm just working on trying to get in the right frame of mind to compose. I want to compose more. Last year, I was involved in a project that was very interesting for me. I wrote a ballet for a ballet company in San Diego, the San Diego Ballet Company. And my daughter is a ballerina with that company. And so I wrote a jazz little suite for the company and, of course, for my daughter. And that was very nice and very interesting to do. I've never written music to be danced to, not purposely. You know, I mean, people could dance to my music, but this was written specifically for dance and for classical ballet. And so it was interesting in trying to take jazz, which relies heavily on improvisation, but having it organized in such a way that the dancers were able to do what they need to do, because they are not improvising. They are doing what they do. And so to toe the line between, you know, having to be, you know, to still adhere to the jazz improvisational aspect and still supply the right musical information for the dancers. That became a little tricky, but it was interesting. I learned a lot. So I might do that again, since I've got a relationship with this ballet company. So maybe next year I will do that again as well. And but in terms of projects, I've got a couple of new records out. One called The Journey. Another one, I released a self-produced CD, re-released it, and called Illusions in Blue, both of which are in the shops at the, you know, on the cruise here. And so I just want to write more, and certainly I'm still passionately very much in love with playing music. I'm not tired of it yet. I love it maybe more than I did when I was a younger person. Okay, Charles McPherson.